From September 11th to the Great Recession, from Katrina to government shutdowns, small businesses have been battling stresses and shocks. Through grit to innovation, they have sustained local economies with their resilience. Now, they face an unprecedented threat, COVID-19. As Congress scrambles to provide aid, coronavirus economic relief packages are overlooking millions of micro-businesses. Many of these businesses are owned by people of color, veterans, immigrants, and others who operate in low and moderate income communities. During the best of times, they face hardships in gaining access to the resources needed to thrive, grow, and hire. Their remarkable innovation to provide economic freedom for their families is on full display. What will you do to support the heartbeat of the nation's economy?
Hello, and thank you for having AEO into your home. In these strange times, it is a privilege to welcome you to the AEO very special 2020 National Conference. Nearly a year ago, when we selected our theme, Resilient, Small Businesses Strengthening Local Economies, little did we know the extreme relevance that line would take on. But here we are in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic. Resilience indeed, as we see where our favorite restaurant has been repurposed to serve first responders or feed local families in need in the neighborhood. More than ever, these businesses are lifelines, especially in places hit hardest by the pandemic. Small businesses owned by entrepreneurs of color are providing essential supplies even as they face extinction. And what our industry, what AEO members and partners have always known, has been shown to the rest of America. Main Street, micro, and small businesses are essential to our local communities and the heartbeat of this nation. If there was ever any doubt of the lifeblood relationship between Black and Brown-owned businesses and the people and neighborhoods they serve, it is impossible to miss that reality now. We know how much the AEO conference means to so many of you. After all, this is our 27th conference. And each conference has served to equip practitioners and industry leaders with tools, latest trends, best practices, and networking opportunities. The AEO conference serves as a hub of innovation and thought leadership, provoking ideas to help Main Street rise to its full potential. Our format may have changed, but our commitment to deliver on our brand promise that you will partner smarter, innovate faster, and execute better with AEO has not wavered. We mobilized our efforts to craft an experience that encompasses some of the traditional elements of the AEO conference, but of course is relevant to the current climate and needs of the AEO community. In this new format, you will have opportunities to engage each other and interact with compelling content in an interactive format. Here are a few features you can look forward to. Opportunities to attend a virtual series starting today through June 25th, a few hours each week. It combines a live town hall, virtual coffee breaks, compelling stories from Main Street business owners, giveaways, and networking with colleagues during a virtual happy hour. A knowledge center with resources and ways for you to watch at your own pace if unable to attend each live session. A digital community that will allow attendees to discover and share newest insights with uploaded videos. And AEO's signature Tim Talks are back. Tim Talks, like Tim or TED Talks, TIM stands for Transformation in Microfinance. So stay on the lookout for Tim Talks. You'll also have a dynamic platform for our audience to hear from a diverse group of speakers. Can you believe we're bringing you over 90 speakers in the next few weeks, including renowned journalists Roland Martin and Soledad O'Brien? Resilience cannot be taken for granted. It requires agility, resources, mindfulness, and the wisdom to ask for help. Insights I, for one, have learned from small businesses over the many years I've been at this work and all the things we ourselves had to do. I'm proud to say AEO is resilient. AEO had to pivot. We had to create a response to help our local businesses all over this nation. We joined others across our broader industry to call for capital to CDFIs, to community development financial institutions. But we knew our business owners needed more than a loan. We knew that our members, our nonprofit organizations, would need additional resources to offer their business clients. So we mobilized our partners and asked them to help. Together, we created Main Street Rise, AEO's COVID-19 relief program for small businesses with less than 10 employees. In leadership and collaboration, we launched the Page 30 Coalition and are so grateful that to date, nearly 50 organizations representing tens of thousands of entrepreneurs have joined the coalition as we take up the legislative battle to get businesses, particularly Black, Brown, Native, immigrant, women, rural, veteran businesses, to get them what they need to retain and regain the essential role they have in our communities. I hope you will go to www.aeoworks.org to check out these programs, and we invite you to join us. Lastly, we asked our sponsors for help. A virtual conference over 4 weeks, it was not what they were used to. But oh my, how they have responded. On your screen, you can see each of those sponsors. And keep watching that list. There may be more. We applaud them for stepping up and for their generosity, which allowed us to provide this special event with free admission. Like many shocks and tragedies, this coronavirus pandemic is like a magnifying glass over structural inequality that is generations old. Because of the thousands of you that are joining us at this conference, I remain optimistic that we will put an end to this disgusting and intolerable inequality, and with our equity lens on, answer the question, what will you do to help Main Street businesses be resilient? I am so glad you are with us. As I just mentioned, we are glad to have Tim Talks back in this conference. Joining us next with our first AEO signature Tim Talk of this series is Jenny Flores from our flagship sponsor, Wells Fargo.
Hi. So excited today about AEO's 2020 conference. I'm Jenny Flores, Head of Small Business Growth Philanthropy for Wells Fargo. We come together in what is likely the most defining moment for small businesses in our lifetime, both for the depth of the struggles that entrepreneurs face, but also for the vast opportunity that we have to advocate for small businesses and to redefine what that small business landscape can be like. And we have a great opportunity. Consider this. 92% of businesses in the United States are micro businesses. They contribute $2 trillion to the economy and sustain more than 30 million jobs. We all have a responsibility to ensure this sector of our economy is thriving. Coronavirus, though, has made it much more urgent. And I know that over the past several weeks, many of you have faced some very difficult situations. Perhaps you have had to consider how you're going to reshuffle your staff, you have reduced revenue, and you've had to pivot your business models so quickly that in normal times it would have been impossible. But I want you to know that you're not alone. You have a partner and a supporter in Wells Fargo. I can certainly empathize with the struggles that you're facing. I grew up surrounded by entrepreneurs. My grandfather owned a real estate company and a coffee export business. And my mother is a serial entrepreneur that over the years has started 5 businesses. Unsurprisingly, this entrepreneurial gene has transferred to my daughter, who at 7 years old is considering starting her first business. She wants to start a summer camp for girls that would help them learn how to protect the environment. So I know what it's like to have the livelihood of your family depend on the success of your business. So at Wells Fargo, in order to respond during this very difficult moment, Wells Fargo Bank and the Wells Fargo Foundation are marshaling resources from throughout the enterprise to ensure that we have solutions that are responsive. We also know that there is no silver bullet, and so we are partnering with nonprofits and government to be able to use all of our assets to respond and to rapidly respond. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of the most recent actions that Wells Fargo has taken in order to be responsive. This is above and beyond the Paycheck Protection Program. In terms of our consumers, we have supported 1.7 million customers to defer $4.6 billion in payments. That's both principal and interest. We've also waived over $75 million in fees. In terms of our foundation, when COVID hit, we quickly put a lot of our grant making into action. Since March, we have approved $17 million to over 150 nonprofits throughout the country that are focused on small business. As a result, these nonprofits have been able to support small businesses with payment deferrals, interest rate buy-downs, direct cash infusion, and technical assistance. And we're also very happy to have committed $175 million for our signature initiative that we call Diverse Community Capital. Diverse Community Capital is focused on supporting CDFIs that are providing low-cost and flexible capital to women-owned businesses, businesses that are owned by people of color, and immigrants. In order for you to have a much deeper perspective and insight into how we do this work, I wanted to share a story of one of our entrepreneurs, Adrian Espinosa Garcia, who immigrated to the United States from Bolivia. When he arrived, he had a job in a restaurant, and he found this new passion for cooking. As a result, he decided to open a business, and with a loan from the Wells Fargo Diverse Community Capital Program, he was able to launch successfully. And I want to show you this video. Let's roll the video, please.
Nice. So the name of my company is Empanada Club. I make big, baked, delicious empanadas and salsas. I sell them at breweries, farmers markets, small festivals. Hey there, how are you? Have you guys tried the empanadas before? I came to the States 4 years ago from Bolivia, directly to Maine. I used to work as an engineer in Bolivia. When I came here, the first job that I could get, it was in a restaurant. In Bolivia, I didn't know even how to make a sandwich. And when I came here, I learned how to cook, and I like it. It's something that I didn't know I was gonna like. My idea to start Empanada Club came because I couldn't find empanadas as I can find it in Bolivia, made from scratch. I started like 3 years ago making 10 empanadas in my apartment, and they will never work, but I just keep doing it. I learned how to make them better. I am having fun being an entrepreneur, but it's like having a baby, basically. So this business is always crying. I didn't know how to start a business in the States. I started going to different networking events, looking up on internet, and that's how I find CEI and the SMART program.
Here in Maine, Start Smart works with immigrants from all over the world. We've worked with people from 92 different countries who have started almost 500 businesses.
Hey, John. How are you?
Hey, Adrian. We really integrate financing and business advising. Often, folks that come to CEI maybe couldn't get financing from a mainstream bank. And so we help, whether it be immigrants or women entrepreneurs, with the business advising so that they then can become eligible for a loan here at CEI to be able to take it to the next level.
I started getting like a $5,000 loan. I get it like in 2 weeks or less.
Adrian received a wicked fast loan, and the resources from Wells Fargo helped to fund that loan.
We've provided a combination of grant support, really to directly fund the technical assistance and the mentoring that CEI provides to diverse small business owners. And we've coupled that with low interest rate loans that CEI is then able to lend out to these small businesses.
CEI definitely helped me to get my confidence. I'm happy that I have them as a partners. I couldn't have be where I am without them. Hi, my name is Adrian, and I'm the Empanada Club founder.
Put him in touch with Food Fork Lab, which has been a great spot for him to offer his cooking classes as well as catering business.
And this is the way I like to do it, like turn it around, flour. I'm always homesick, but when I make an empanada, it makes me feel at home. Punch it. I'm in a mission now to share my culture, and that keeps me like really happy.
Cheers!
Something that keeps my business and myself a purpose. I put chorizo and cheese on these ones.
This is better.
But the cheese and the flavor of the peppers really comes through, and it's a really nice crust.
Say that again, what?
Entrepreneurs like Adrian are the spirit of this country, and I'm actually really pleased to let you know that Adrian received a loan modification through one of our grantees, Coastal Enterprises. This is just one of the many ways in which Wells Fargo is supporting small business. And of course, we continue to support the important work of AEO in advocating for small businesses and underserved communities in this country. I want to provide a special thank you to Connie Evans. Connie, thank you for your leadership and being such an effective champion for your AEO members and partners. As I look into the future, I know that many businesses will survive and thrive and others won't make it. But I think those that make it are going to push forward with this new renaissance of ingenuity. And we're already seeing some examples of this from companies like breweries who are pivoting to hand sanitizer and clothing companies who are pivoting to manufacturing PPE. This other wave of change makers, of these dreamers, they're having the audacity to use their business to drive social impact. These are entrepreneurs that balance both profit and purpose. And I am very excited to be able to get behind some of these change makers to be able to make the world a better place. So more to come on how Wells Fargo will do this. But as I wrap up my remarks, I want to leave you with this. How can we partner to ensure the success of these entrepreneurs? How can we accelerate their growth curve so that they're not spinning around in circles for 5 to 10 years while they figure it out? I believe that everyone here can be a bridge and a ladder. How can you be a bridge to help an existing entrepreneur who is navigating through this very difficult economic situation to be able to thrive? Can you leverage your networks? Can you share your knowledge? Can you spend some time with him or her to ensure that they succeed? Or can you be a ladder to help pull somebody up, perhaps a new entrepreneur who's just getting started, who doesn't know how to navigate, but can rely on someone like you and AEO to help make this journey a lot more smooth? I know we all have the ability to do that. And at Wells Fargo, we strive to be both. I want to thank you for having me this morning, and I want to let you know that we're here to partner with you now and in the future. Again, thanks for having me, and I hope you enjoy the conference.
Hi, I'm Corey Briscoe, and we are elated to have you here at AEO's 2020 National Conference here in Houston, Texas, or wherever you are across the country. And though we're not physically able to meet in Houston this year, as planned, I promise you that we are committed to making sure you have the full AEO conference experience. In particular, we're committed to that brand promise, ensuring that you're able to innovate faster, partner smarter, and execute better. Here are a few quick tips to make sure that you can maximize your conference experience. Number 1, registration. The only way to get access to the VIP experience is by going to aeoworks.org and selecting conferences and registering. By registering, you'll have access to polls, chats, live Q&As with our speakers, networking, virtual happy hours, and opportunities to win giveaways every week. This week, I heard we were even giving away an apple. Number 2, engage. Connect with us by going on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Engage us using the hashtag #RevitalizeMainStreet, which champions the theme that every small business matters. And lastly, connect with the conference team. We're here to help. Having technical troubles? Want to find out more information on AEO and the work that we do? Or want to connect through membership, a cohort, or something that you've heard? Send us an email at aeoconference@aeoworks.org or call the number listed below. And now we are so privileged to have my colleague, Soledad O'Brien, as we embark on an amazing conversation with city leaders, microbusiness and microfinance industry leaders, and small businesses across the country as we talk about resilient small businesses strengthening local economies. Over to you, Soledad.
Everybody, it's Soledad O'Brien. Welcome. We are not in Houston. We are in our own living rooms or bedrooms or kitchens, but we're all together having a very important conversation. And so I guess there was never a more important time to be discussing this year's theme, which of course is resilience, small businesses strengthening local communities. So today we're going to do a very deep dive across many different platforms in what does resilience look like and how can we support that resilience, whether we're talking about assistance from governmental agencies, from microfinance, or just what entrepreneurs can do as they think about building resilience within their own organizations. A big part of our conversations will be to look at what I call BC, before coronavirus, and AC, after coronavirus, because of course right now coronavirus is really, I think, framing how we're going to think about our extra when it comes to resilience. And it's going to be one of the things that we talk to all of our panelists today about. The way this is going to work is I will start by moderating the conversation for about 20 minutes or so. Earlier, you heard Corey say register. You need to do that if you want to submit questions. So please register and make sure that you are able to submit questions to all the panelists that we have today. After about 20 minutes or so, we're going to start opening up those questions that will be sent to me that you guys can submit to make sure that our panelists get those questions and can answer them for you. And so we are recreating the live panel experience, but we're all in our homes and we're very excited to be part of this conference. So let's get underway. I'm going to introduce you to our panelists for our first panel, which is a look at how city leaders are thinking about resilience. Janae Queen-Nazaire is with Living City. She's a facilitator, a collaborator, a bridge builder, a chief strategy officer. She leverages stakeholders in public and private and philanthropic ways across American cities. And she identifies and then tests innovative approaches to deploy millions of dollars in private and public capital for investing in people of color. I usually ask my panelists if I can call them by their first names, and usually they say yes, but I'm going to go ahead since we're meeting for the first time on Skype. Janae, it's great to have you. Thanks for being with me. Dr. Lomax Campbell is with us as well. He's in Rochester, New York. He's the director of the Mayor's Office on Community Wealth Building, serving diverse residential and small business clientele to foster economic equality and also increase opportunities for residents to participate in Rochester's economic recovery. Dr. Campbell, may I call you Lomax as well? I always hesitate to just call people by their first names, but I think that's how this panel is going to work today. Thank you for joining us. Mia Richardson oversees the day-to-day operations of the Casey BizCare office, a free business resource and advocacy and information center for new and existing businesses that are operating within Kansas City. Specifically, BizCare provides guidance and assistance for businesses that are negotiating complicated things, like the city's licensing and permitting and vendor approval processes. And she helps streamline those initiatives to remove some of the barriers to entry. So it's so great, Nia. Again, I'm going to, you're okay with it, call you by your first name as we do this panel. I assume you'll all do the same for me. And we'll get going. Thanks for starting. I'd like each of you, and Janae, if we may start with you, to talk a little bit about the work that you do, specifically for those who are watching. Spell out your day-to-day job and how you think about assisting small businesses.
Yeah, thank you. And so happy to be here. So thanks to everyone who was responsible for putting this together. So to talk about the day-to-day work we do, I have to start with our vision, right? And so our work is around closing racial income and wealth gaps so that all people in U.S. cities are economically secure, building wealth, and living abundant, dignified, and connected lives. And this has been, we've got to this place over a 30-year journey. And in our journey, we have built deep relationships with local municipalities and worked with leaders on the ground to sort of convene them and understand what does it take to see better outcomes for their residents. What we know about government is that government has played an outsized role in creating policies and practices that have benefited some and not others. And so we believe that they can play an outsized role in undoing those policies and practices that disproportionately impact folks of color in our country. And so our premise really is about what power do city leaders, electeds, appointeds, community members have in their role? What agency do they have in their roles whereby they can actually affect some change? How might you use procurement differently, which is one of the things that happened in New Orleans? How might you build an incubator and partner with cross-sector actors in Memphis to ensure that local small businesses actually have access to capital? Where in Memphis, they changed their payer model so that the folks who didn't have banking relationships and other histories of financial transactions with large institutions could actually get paid by the government, could be on prime contracts as subs and so forth. And so we're constantly in spaces with these leaders trying to figure out what works to support small businesses and residents in their city so that we see better outcomes across systems.
Thank you. Lomax, can you walk us through specifically what you're doing day to day?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me on the panel today. This is so exciting. So I work in the Mayor's Office of Community Wealth Building here in Rochester, New York, under Mayor Lovely Ann Warren. And we're really the second office of our kind in the country. And so when I took on the role as director, there was no template for how to do what we were doing, since the other office in Virginia, Richmond, was still kind of relatively new. And so what we've come to is three areas that we're working in. First, being development. And then lastly, it's around financial empowerment initiatives, which are open both to residents and small businesses. So for small businesses, we're doing everything from providing direct technical assistance to do things for small business owners that they can't do for themselves. That could be, for example, helping them to determine whether or not the market that they're looking to go into is an attractive market, using standard tools that you'd normally cover in an MBA program. We wouldn't expect them to know that. We are also providing one-on-one coaching services to talk them through processes that they can do for themselves and be empowered to do so with a little outside help. Next, we offer workshop series in threes, or in trios, as we call them, small business trios, some focused on marketing, some focused on finance, and some focused on leveraging diversity and inclusion and procurement and things like that. Next, you have general programs for small businesses and the organizations that serve small businesses, and we can get a little deeper into that. And then lastly, we're working on building the entrepreneurial ecosystem in our region to really establish an economic development strategy for the city that's not disjointed from the other counties, the 9 counties in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Nia, you mentioned that you help sort of clear the path from obstacles for people who are trying to figure out how to navigate sort of opportunities in government. Can you spell that out a little more specifically for us?
Yeah, so the KC BizCare office, we help residents, citizens, whoever wants to start a business in Kansas City, navigate the process for business registration, permitting, and licensing process. We make it easier for you to understand what all it takes. Before working for the city, I probably would have been completely confused about where to start, thinking maybe I'll just go to business license office, but not realizing that I have to register my business with the state. I got to get an EIN number. I might need permits to operate my business because I have a restaurant. And so we help people navigate that process and make it go by much smoothly. Because something that takes people months to figure out or do, I can probably help you do it in like an hour or less. And we work with a lot of micro enterprises, the everyday mom and pop shops that are getting going, who have a small business, who are either Main Street, who are doing work with the city, who want to become certified, who want to just be a vendor, or if they want to look at other government agencies. We're trying to bring all that together, build an ecosystem around that, but understanding we're a key piece of that, because regardless if I go and take a class on entrepreneurship, I still need to figure out how to get my business set up and ready to go. So we do kind of make sure that you get in that process, get in the go and get it done faster so you can get to focus on what you love most, which is your business and getting it going.
You, two of you mentioned ecosystem, and so I want to dig into that a little bit more. Post-coronavirus, or mid-coronavirus as we may be, how has that ecosystem changed? How are you thinking? What are the problems that you're seeing with this ecosystem, which always are very fragile, we know, and how are you addressing some of, it feels like somebody's just dropped a giant, bomb on an ecosystem that's already fragile. What are you seeing? What are your big concerns, and how are you addressing them? Lomax, may I start with you?
Sure. And I got dropped out, so can you repeat the question? I just got back on.
Sure, I'm happy to. I was taught, you mentioned earlier ecosystem, and we all know from 7th grade science class that ecosystems are very, very fragile. Coronavirus, of course, has really disrupted this ecosystem. What are your biggest concerns, and what are you doing to address this fragile ecosystem where you are?
Got you. So obviously, pre-COVID-19, we obviously had structural and systemic barriers that small businesses, Black and brown businesses, face, like access to capital, for example, and knowing who to go to for what services. And so really, COVID-19 exacerbated that reality. And for example, with the payroll protection program, one article in the news noted that 90% of the Black and brown and women-owned businesses that applied for the payroll protection program loans were unable to actually get them because they were not able to maintain the sufficient levels of deep relationships with banks that would allow them to access them. And so they went to their friends who traditionally were white. So some of the biggest concerns is just making sure that as we're building this ecosystem, we have activities that help small businesses, Black and brown businesses, know what resources are available, who's doing what, and actually provide the technical support to walk them through the process of accessing those services and resources so that they're not left behind and be more resilient in the process.
Janae, from your resume, I know that you are truly a realist. What are your big concerns about this fragile ecosystem in the middle of, and as we hopefully head out of, coronavirus?
Yeah, thanks, Soledad. It's from health and education to criminal justice and economic security, racial disparities are bad, if not worse than they were 50 years ago. And so I appreciate you sort of saying that the ecosystem was already fragile, because there's a lot of folks who've been in denial about that. Whatever measure you look at in any system, people of color in America, particularly Black people, are struggling compared to their white counterparts. And one of the things that we have identified as the root cause of that problem is individual, institutional, and systemic racism. Racism meaning race, prejudice plus power, intentionally designed by those in power, sort of, again, to benefit some and not benefit others. And so what folks are seeing is not new. It is not news. These things have existed for a long time. The problem is everyone suffers, because this is our history, this is our reality and our legacy. And like these everyday injustices have real impacts on real people, and we're all feeling the effects of it. And so I think that's part of the thing that we really want to get people to move on, is that actually don't design a bunch of race neutral programs. Be intentional about Black and brown businesses. Those ones are the ones that were growing in terms of startups. Actually, white men were the largest number of folks starting up business. There's been a decline in that over the past 20 or 30 years. So just by sheer numbers, invest in Black and brown entrepreneurs. The demographics are shifting. Invest in Black and brown entrepreneurs. We need the products and the services to support. But if they can't, it's not just about access to capital. They have to be able to secure it. So I don't even want to hear about access anymore. I want to hear about security. And so that needs to be designed in our current system. Otherwise, we're going to just be right back in the same place we are when the next, not even pandemic hits. The pandemic just exposed it to people who decided to not see it.
Nia, when Connie was beginning her remarks, she talked about legislative battles. And I'm curious what you see as those upcoming legislative battles. What battles need to be fought? How should people who are not in governmental agencies be thinking about how they can support some of these battles from off the battlefield, if I keep the metaphor going?
I thought I was going to get the ecosystem question. As far as
you're welcome to work that in as well.
It's okay. It's okay. As far as legislative goes, for me, what I see is that I guess it goes back to the comment or the discussion about the ecosystem, because it does bring a lot to light of what the problem is. And I almost feel like the ecosystem is probably okay if it does break and fall apart. Because legislative wise, we need to look at better policies. Like Janae was saying, we need to look at policies that are more intentional. We need to look at policies that actually help people, that actually get them to the next level, that actually open the doors and remove barriers. But until we remove those systematic racist policies that are in place that are keeping people behind, I don't think we're going to see any real progression with our small and our minority-owned businesses. We learned a lot as a part of Living Cities, going through the racial equity training and looking at pretty much all the laws that were put in place that have allowed others to succeed over some other folks. And I think all in all, we really just need to go back to the drawing book and look at how we're putting policies in place and how they're actually helping people. And I think COVID-19 is probably the best time to do it, because it's a time where we can kind of clear the slate and say, let's start fresh. What's working, what's not working, and let's start moving forward and being more aggressive on those things that may be working, but we're not pushing hard enough. And a lot of what I see in Kansas City as far as legislative stuff is, when we get to having affirmative action programs, are we actually enforcing those programs? Are we penalizing? Are they strong? And are they helping our businesses? And I think those are some of the legislative things that we kind of have to look at on a local level But then it just kind of rises from there when you get to your state and your federal. And I think COVID-19 with the PPP loans and just showing the gap of that is really kind of bringing all those things to light.
Well, let's talk about the PPP loans and the gap in that, because I think that's a very good example. Sometimes for people who are outside of this ecosystem, if you will, they really don't necessarily see the inherent injustice in a system. Lomax, why don't you tackle that for me? Because, what's that saying? You don't ever let a good crisis go to waste, meaning there's an opportunity here to fix things. But at the same time, I'm not sure I'm feeling in the American public environment right now a sense of, yes, justice for all businesses and all people, and let's finally make things right.
Wow. So that is a huge question, and thank you for asking me to begin to reflect on it. A couple of points. We have to first off look at the history and the context holistically, right? The immediate structural injustice, if you will, as I mentioned, was that this program is being administered through banks. And first and foremost, in order to qualify, in order to be able to have it forgiven, you have to have people on payroll. You have to have a relationship, pre-existing relationship with a bank. And I'm not talking just having a checking and savings account, but generally who they favored in the first round of disbursements were those businesses who had deep relationships with them, folks who maybe golf with the loan advisors and so on and so forth. But you also have to reflect on the fact that we have had a number of bad run-ins with banks and lending institutions throughout our history here in this land. For example, going back to the 1800s during Reconstruction, you had the situation with the Freedmen's Bank, where a lot of Black businesses made deposits into the Freedmen's Bank only to have their money loaned out or lended out to white businesses who defaulted with no protection. And that led to the creation of the federal deposits insurance that we now call FDIC, which are up to about I think it's 250,000 now. But we don't trust banks. Think about the fact that a lot of our small businesses don't have employees. And so making payroll is something that's a challenge for them. A few weeks ago, I was speaking to one of the restaurants owners who is a part of the Black Restaurant Association here in Rochester. And they said a lot of their issues with a lot of these funding programs is that their employees, some of them, are under the table. They're paying them under the table. And so there's structurally that barrier that prevents them from accessing it, on top of the lack of the relationships, on top of the trust that has never been established or been misused or abused over the years. So there's a lot of factors.
So Nia, let me ask you a question. When people talk about resilience, it's always easier to be resilient when you've got money in the bank and you've got your health, and you're more resilient when you've been more resilient, right? And the history of minority business is not, generations and generations of resilient, right? It's always building on something that was a little bit underfunded, undersupported always. How would you best talk about the best kinds of partnership to help realistically build businesses at a time when resilience is everything, but a lot of people aren't feeling particularly resilient?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we're noticing right now is that relationships are essential. And just like Dr. Lomax said, what we're seeing right now is that having a banking relationship is essential. Having a lawyer is essential. Having your books together is essential, because now I'm going to miss out on a lot of these things. And how do I really survive? I think this pandemic is actually bringing us closer together as business owners, where we are working together. We are supporting each other. Hey, did you hear about this information? Hey, did you hear about that funding that's out there? I see more of our businesses connecting, working together. I see a lot of our beauty and barbershops coming together. Hopefully, many of them were not cutting while they were supposed to be shut down, but hopefully they were doing it safely. I would say right now we are surviving and trying our best to be resilient with the little resources that we do have. And I hope that moving forward, as we begin to reopen, I think we're really going to be tested about how resilient we can be as we battle COVID-19. Because not only do our are people getting COVID-19 and dying from it? I'm hearing that 60% of Black people are making up the deaths in America. And I think in Kansas City, we make up 50% of the cases alone. But our businesses are getting COVID-19. And how are we helping them to survive through this? And right now, it's essential to have that relationship. Knowing me, knowing people in my office, me knowing other folks to connect them with. I think right now it's like a social ecosystem that we're building with each other and making those connections and going from there. I feel like that's part of the way we can be resilient without having a lot of money, but it's about who you know. It goes back to that factor. It's about who you know, not always what you know. What you know kind of comes in with that as well.
Janae, this question's for you, and it came to me by text. And it comes off of your introduction where I talked about how you're a bridge builder and a facilitator. You've literally got a title that's like 9 adjectives long. Bridge builder, facilitator, collaborator, on and on. And this question goes like this. I love the bridge and ladder metaphor. How do you be bridges and ladders to small businesses, even if you're not a service provider? What can people do that actually supports the work that the three of you are doing for people who aren't really in government, Janae?
Yeah, good question. Can I tack on something to Nia's really quickly and then bridge to that answer?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things you asked about was resilience in the small businesses. I think the other audience on this webinar are folks who are at community development financial institutions, CDFIs. And CDFIs have been the mechanism for delivering resources to small businesses and folks on the ground. How about, and I do not profess to be an expert, but what are the policies, the status quo policies that prevent CDFIs from being creative and flexible with the businesses? Like, get rid of them, right? So you can help businesses who make up to certain amounts of money, and then there's another set of businesses who'll get rescued once the market recovers. But there's some folks in between who make maybe about $2 to $4 million. How about helping those folks? Also, what resources do CDFIs have to provide technical assistance? Nia named all the back office supports and the things that do not exist for small business owners, and the support that they can have. So how about we fund the technical assistance support and not just see it as something that business owners should just come to the table with? They had an idea, they have a talent. They didn't go to MBA and get an MBA to learn how to run a business necessarily. Some people did, but help some folk out. Right. And I think that connects to the question, I think it's like non-government and other folks do to help? Well, I mean, if you got to organize. If you have a professional background, there are lots of small businesses who need services, legal services, contracting services. There are folks who understand how government works and what agenda to get on to sort of raise a concern. If you know those things, offer that support, create collaboratives where people get together and you bring your your trade to the table and start bargaining and trading. Money was created. We created that. We have so many other rich resources that we can offer to support our community, but it goes to what we believe about people and why we believe it. Unfortunately, in the fabric or the DNA of our country, there has been sort of this notion about people of color and how we have othered them and sort of dismissed them. And that just should not be anymore, because we're all affected. Every American is affected. Every resident is affected. And so how might we see each other and their humanity and want more for one another? When you get there, then you'll be able to bring your full self and all the resources you have to bear to whatever agency or stakeholder is working on a particular problem.
Great, Janae, thank you. And I want to especially thank you for teeing up my next panel, which is microbusiness lending, and also the CDFIs as well. So I appreciate you throwing that in for me. I'm going to give the next audience question to Lomax, if I may. Tamala asked this: how critical are small businesses to municipalities? And what can we do to make sure they're not overlooked in the future during good and chaotic times? And I would sort of maybe even modify that to not even think future, but think currently. We're in a chaotic time. We're in a difficult time. How important are these small businesses? Because I think, as Janae was saying, often they're sort of dismissed, especially if they're a minority business.
I really appreciate that question from the sister, because Rochester historically has been known as the city of the big three, Xerox, Kodak, and Bausch and Lomb, back in the manufacturing heyday. And since the decline of large manufacturers, industry, and so forth, Rochester's tried to make the migration or the leap from being a company town to a town of companies. Really, so it's all about small businesses. And being that Rochester has its second Black mayor, and Mayor Lovely Ann Warren, who's from the neighborhood like myself, we've actually centered Black and brown small businesses as part of her administration through my office and through some of the work my colleagues in the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development are doing. And so they're very important. Literally, the majority of the jobs of the future are going to be held by small businesses in our community and also nationally. And so some of the ways that we're working to better serve them is we're launching a platform that we're regionally branding Nexus I-90. It's powered by a company called SourceLink out of Kansas City, Missouri. And it's really about better aligning the various types of business services from startup to stay up to scale up to the split up phase of the business life cycle, so that small businesses don't have to try to figure out how to play the game of find the next support, but instead can just plug into an ecosystem that's powered and tuned just for them.
Great. This is another question from our audience, and I'm going to ask Nia if you'll take this one. How can local governments be more prepared for situations like this in the future? What would you tick off for me? What's worked and what's not working that should be better structured?
How we could have been more prepared during this time was having, and what we're building is a centralized infrastructure where we can communicate and reach out to our businesses. I'm uniquely positioned where I'm in the same office as our business licensing, and we have not communicated or integrated the data where I could see all the businesses that are licensed with the city. I can see all the businesses that are certified with the city, and I should be able to report that out to our politicians so they can be aware of what's happening, who's in your district, how many businesses are in this industry, here's what they need. But also when we have times like this, to be able to communicate with them and touch them and say, here are resources, and what else do you need during this time? And so right now we are actually building out that infrastructure, and we have a survey out there for our small and minority businesses because we want to tap into those micro enterprises that are the fabric of our community. When I walk out my door, I want to know that my barber is still good to go. I want to know that the store that I go to or the little store in the corner is available. We know that in Kansas City, our micro enterprises, or let alone our small businesses, and I don't know the exact number, it just left my brain, but I know it's over 50%. I want to say it's somewhere between 60 to 80% created a big number of jobs in Kansas City. It's not the big businesses that are creating the big jobs, it's our smaller businesses. And if we don't learn how to connect with them and get them the resources, then that's going to impact jobs, that's going to impact economic growth in our different communities. And so right now, I think what we should have and what we didn't have before was that infrastructure to communicate, to get resources, to get the data so that we can respond quickly and effectively for our small businesses.
I think that's really great. I think that's really great advice for everyone, right? Is this idea of like centralized data so you can communicate it across a large platform in any kind of emergency, or, you know, God willing, in good times too. That's always good to have that data. I'm going to ask you guys one final question to wrap up before our panel ends. And I'm curious if you're optimistic and you're hopeful, or if you're pessimistic and concerned that as we come through this crisis in terms of public health, that we're going to see in our wake just decimated small businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses. How are you feeling? Janae, will you start it off for me?
Sure. I'm always optimistic because I believe in the best in who we are as humans. And this is evidenced by Vaughn Fourier and Judith Dangerfield in New Orleans and the work that they did with local businesses after putting on a disparity study to meet folks where they were and actually get them contracts that were connected to the cities And that actually turned so many small businesses and their families around in New Orleans. Memphis also did a disparity study and actually made a huge difference in their local residents' lives because the city was involved. Long Beach has a foreign-born immigrant-focused approach. And so the team, John and folks there, are making a difference because they're making intentional decisions. And so Joanne Massey, again, in Memphis, just sort of a firecracker and getting everyone together. Those are the people that encourage me and allow me to remain optimistic because they are putting people in the center, they're putting racial equity in the center, and they're using the resources that government has to bear to do something different so that we do not continue forth in status quo behavior. But we're not only surviving, rather we're thriving, and that's all of us. So I remain optimistic.
How about you, Lomac?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot of reasons to remain optimistic here in the city of Rochester. For starters, about a month ago, the mayor convened a task force of senior management and frontline workers who are wrapped around the touch points for small business under the moniker Jumpstart the Rock. And so that's been going well. We initiated a survey to understand what small businesses' needs were, and if they were to reopen, what would be required for them to do so safely. In addition to that, we're continuing with our implementation of Nexus I-90, which is planning to launch this summer, so that we can also capture and track data across our 9-county region. In addition to that, an organizing collective I'm a part of called the Greater Rochester Black Agenda Group recently launched a declaration that is racism is a public health crisis, and has also initiated a series of what we call emotional emancipation circles spearheaded by Community Healing Network and the Association of Black Psychologists. And the city supports this and have trained some of our staff folks have been trained, including myself, to facilitate these circles. And so we're doing a number of things to provide the necessary support emotionally, socially, from a business standpoint, technically, for small businesses. And I just think that as we continue to push those levers holistically, focusing and centering our Black and brown businesses, we will continue to thrive together.
Excellent. And Nia, I'm going to give you the final word in this panel today.
Yes.
No pressure.
I would say if it were not for the tools that I'm getting from Living Cities and the resources and the connections and meeting the people that I'm on a panel with today, I would not be as optimistic. But there are times when I'm away from them and I look outside and I'm a little concerned. Because like I said, in Kansas City, you know, the COVID-19 cases in our predominantly Black communities, the community that I live in, the community that I grew up in, we're getting hit the hardest. And as we begin to open back up, as other businesses are, you know, planning parties and getting excited, I'm on the ground trying to figure out, how do I keep people safe? How do I keep the spread from going? You know, a lot of people in my community do not trust the government. They do not think that this is a real thing. They do not have access to the PPE. And so I'm trying my best to figure out, how do I get all the tools and things that you need right now so that we can fight past this virus and still survive, not just as a people, but as our businesses as well. I'm hoping that COVID-19 is one of those times where it helps things fall apart that wasn't working for us, to allow us the time to rebuild something that will work for us. And I'm hoping that during this time, we can rebuild as a city and put the proper infrastructure in place to support our businesses so that they come out so much better than what they were before COVID-19. My goal is to get you everything that you need, that you are contract ready, you are capital ready, and that beyond COVID-19 or any other pandemic or recession that we have as a nation or as a world like this, that you will survive and you will be more than just resilient. I mean, you will come out on top, and you will be in a position where you can help pull others up. And I think that's what we need a lot more of, others pulling others up and building an ecosystem or a village or whatever word you want to utilize in that sense. And we do this together so we can be resilient going out. So I'm hopeful that we are better off and we are resilient past COVID-19, the small businesses.
Yeah, for me, I would agree. I think that sense of hope relies in understanding that in a lot of ways it really wasn't working before. And again, you know, if you can leverage a crisis, as terrible as it is, to make real change and have real lessons and build real innovation because you recognize there were some big problems before. It wasn't perfect. We don't want to get back to that. Then you can actually make some real change. Thank you so much to our panelists, Nia Richardson and Dr. Janae Queen, and also Dr. Lomax Campbell. I certainly appreciate it. We are going to literally take a 1 minute, and when I say 1 minute, I mean 1 minute break to hear from our sponsor. And then we'll be back on the other side for our next panel, which focuses on resilience from the point of view from micro business industry leaders. Take a look.
Our communities need help like never before. And Wells Fargo employees are assisting millions of customers across America through fee waivers and payment deferrals, helping people stay in their homes through mortgage payment relief efforts, and donating $175 million to help hundreds of local organizations provide food and other critical needs. When you need us, Wells Fargo is here to help.
Everybody, and you just saw a look at our last panelists who we thank for our conversation about what government entities can do to help small businesses navigate what is obviously a very trying time. And luckily in our last panel, they really teed up our next panel, which is talking about micro business industry leaders. What does resilience mean when it comes to them? Many, of course, responsible for the lending, but also at the same time have been very severely impacted about what's happened with coronavirus. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we will kick off this next panel. Luz Urrutia is the CEO of the Opportunity Fund, working to build a more inclusive financial system. For her, much of her career focus has been the banked, the underbanked, and the unbanked. Opportunity Fund is the nation's largest nonprofit small business lender with $90 million in small business loans under management. This year, 2020, the goal was to invest $500 million to drive economic mobility for 50,000 entrepreneurs. And so we're going to talk today with Luz about how coronavirus might be impacting and affecting that strategy. Donna Gambrell joins us as well. She's the president and CEO of Appalachian Community Capital, and her job is attracting and directing investments to community development financial institutions and also mission-driven lenders that are ACC members. And they, in turn, of course, make loans to small business owners in underserved communities in Appalachia. Her life's work has really been in providing capital and credit and financial services to low-income communities. And we have Alex Forster joining us. He's a co-founder and chief strategy officer at Rising Tide Capital. His undergraduate interest, which was in social justice, entrepreneurship, and microfinance, kind of all three of those things, led him to start Rising Tide with a college classmate. His passions, he says, are organizational infrastructure, systems architecture, and outcome management. That is the first time that I've ever listed those things as someone's personal passions. I'm going to talk to him a little bit about how he was able to turn that passion into ways in order to be service to people when it came to thinking about small businesses. He's also interested in how values and culture play a role in long-term systems change. So a big welcome to all of our panelists. It's nice to have you guys. Luz, if I may begin with you, and then I'm going to ask you each to go through for me. I gave a brief introduction in your bio, but tell people what you do day to day with a focus on pre-coronavirus. What was your strategy? Because I know everything's changed.
Yes. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. As Soledad mentioned, Luz Urrutia, I'm the CEO of Opportunity Fund, and we are the leading nonprofit microlender in the country. And I think, before coronavirus, I think we all did about the same thing, right? We worked with small business entrepreneurs, mostly minority, immigrant, people of color, women-owned businesses, providing affordable and responsible capital, technical advice, and financial assistance to help these businesses start, grow, and support themselves. It's been, we all kind of were rocking along thinking things were going well and continuing with our lives as we're our small businesses. And all of a sudden, COVID hits. And unfortunately, the landscape now is very, very different. And for our small business owners, very, very difficult.
Donna?
Well, hello, and thank you again for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So Appalachian Community Capital, which is the organization that I manage, is a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, CDFI lending intermediary. We have 22 members, and they are located throughout the Appalachian region, which extends all the way along the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, starting at the tip of New York and going all the way to the top tip of Mississippi, and it includes all of West Virginia and the portions of 12 other states in between. Before COVID-19, my members, again, 22 of those members, focused on small business lending in the Appalachian region. These included, of course, lending to minority and women-owned businesses as well. Extraordinary organizations that have been doing this type of lending for decades and had gone through many, many types of emergencies and certainly natural disasters and others. And when COVID-19 struck, of course, it was a disaster like no other, because you saw the convergence of both a health crisis and an economic crisis. And like Luz, we, of course, stepped into the breach very quickly. Our members were working and continue to work with small business owners and micro lenders in the region, providing assistance, whether it's through grants or low-cost loans, continue to help those small business owners with business advisory services, and really looking at not only how can we make it through this very difficult storm that we all are in currently, but what happens when we come out of that storm? What awaits those small business owners and micro lenders? How can the support be provided to them to make sure that they're able to stand back on their feet and to help their businesses grow and thrive? So like my other panelists, like Luz and Alex, we are working, of course, 24/7, just trying to make sure that not only those small business owners, but our own organizations are also stable after we return to what we hope will be a normal operations. But of course, it's still very much a wait and see.
Alex, I had mentioned before you popped on that your passions were organizational infrastructure, systems architecture, and outcome measurement, which I had thought it would be more like roller skating and something. So walk me through how you see pre-coronavirus that now being changed post-coronavirus. Obviously, all of those things that I've just mentioned as your passions, you're rethinking and re-strategizing. How's this affected you and what you do?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually very excited to be speaking today because today is our organization's anniversary. We're celebrating now 15 years of working on the ground in Jersey City and 6 other cities in Jersey. We do not actually provide loans directly. We partner with our colleagues around the field to make sure that human capital and social capital are the other ingredients that combine along with access to financial capital to create inclusion and equity and opportunity and making sure that entrepreneurship is a path that's available to everyone. So for us, in terms of pre-COVID and post-COVID, I think we really see this as a period of intensification. I really enjoyed the previous panel. Everything that we are seeing and facing right now, it has really been a dimension of all of the forces that have been at work creating the world that we have been navigating through, with the volume really just turned up to 10. That would potentially yield a position of certainly concern, if not despair. But I think, as has been similarly said, this is also a time for optimism, because the level of disruption we're facing is the opportunity to push through. Disruption is not just an element of what was previously in place that we need to protect. It's also an element of what was previously stopping the progress that we were pushing for, and being able to really dismantle some of those structures of racism and inequality, and build a new economy for all.
Yeah, that's interesting because, of course, the last panel really, I think, came to that conclusion, right? There's this opportunity in disruption. Luz, I'm curious, though. I also, the practical, less optimistic side of me, sometimes worries that there's real risk in this wealth gap that we all know about, right? And that very rarely does disruption help people who are already lagging behind. Often disruption just grows that gap and makes it actually far more difficult for them to catch up. One, do you have that concern, Luz? And also, how do you think about making sure that we're mitigating that versus exacerbating that in during COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we need to think about is, when we talk about business recovery after COVID, sometimes it implies that we're trying to recreate the small business landscape that existed prior to the crisis. What we saw in the CDFI industry is that business owners of color and female business owners already faced a myriad of challenges, which showed themselves in lower revenues than white and male-owned firms, less access to capital, less access to social networks. And so I think we need to be very intentional, and we need to make sure that policymakers and those that can help us dramatically impact and improve the landscape of the businesses that we all are talking about, focus really on investing in solutions that make these businesses stronger than pre-crisis. Not just get them back to where they were, but to get them better, to help them rethink their business models, to connect to clients, to contracts, vendors, advisors, funders. And obviously, CDFIs are a key component of this. I think another thing that we all need to keep in mind is that the landscape, the lending landscape, will change dramatically after COVID. Banks who were not necessarily serving our communities prior to COVID will probably take an even further from stance, meaning they will lend less to these small underserved businesses for a variety of reasons, right? Many fintechs, many merchant cash advance firms that were providing, some very responsible and some with not very responsible products, but many of them may not survive either. And they were the ones filling, the gap in the community for capital. And they won't survive because they've lost clients, their portfolio performances are deteriorating. And so that's going to be potentially an even bigger gap of affordable and responsible capital that the market will have. And because CDFIs are already serving these communities, are connected to the communities, understand their needs, we need to emerge out of them stronger so that we can then help to rebuild and revive the economy and rebuild Main Street and make sure that they have access to what they're going to need to get there.
So Luz says, Donna, CDFIs need to emerge, stronger, and yet you guys are under the same pressures. It's not like you operate in a vacuum over here and you're protected from all the same environmental pressures that everybody else. I mean, you too have been, impacted by coronavirus. How do you remain resilient so that you in turn can fill that gap that Luz was just walking us through as I agree. I think you're going to see a lot of people sort of fleeing because what was difficult has now been made more impossible for them. Where do you see that going, Donna?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And Luz, I think, very nicely laid out what those challenges are, certainly for microlenders. And you're right, there's parallel in the organizations that are actually supporting those small businesses and those microlenders as well. So we have the same conundrum when we, as an organization, are looking at where do we get our additional capital from? What sorts of new relationships have to be created and maintained with funders, perhaps that we had not explored before? When we look at our operations itself, where do we need to look at how do we streamline our operations going forward? What are some of the other products that we need to think about as we look at expanding perhaps that portfolio and making it different? Even for us, a small business lender, we're looking at other types of products and other types of collaborations, frankly, with other organizations that may be doing more than just small business. So I really do think it takes, and this is a particular time where it takes organizations, CDFIs, and others, an opportunity to really say, let's look at our business model. Is the business model, which may have been working perfectly fine prior to this terrible crisis, is it going to work the way we want it to work afterwards? And are we missing some opportunities by not thinking about putting a plan into place now? So I think that's the really important thing, is to really start to lay out that plan early on and say, where are the gaps in our organization? Where are our funding gaps? Where are our investment gaps? And what sort of, kind of new world scheme do we want this organization to look like afterwards? I think if we miss that opportunity, then even for some of our organizations, we may be left behind.
So that's interesting, Alex, because Donna's sort of framing this disruption as an opportunity. And for someone who's passionate about organizational infrastructure, great to talk about. But in a crisis, having worked in many big and small businesses, in a crisis, people tend to run around like maniacs, and they don't sit around and calmly think, how do we rethink our organizational infrastructure? But it sounds like Donna's saying the only way to leverage this crisis is to do that. So then, how would you recommend that's done? What does it look like? And this is part of a question too, so I'll throw in this question as well. What advancements in infrastructure is needed to really help the small businesses at the end to come through this crisis as I hate to say the word plus because I don't think it's going to be a plus, but to be moved in a better direction than we have historically been? Maybe that's the way to put it. Alex?
Well, certainly, probably the most prominent theme that is affecting all entrepreneurs and all organizations out in the country right now is a need to shift to a more digital forward business model. That is creating a crunch of activity around needing to figure out how to both to deliver products and services in new ways, how to reach customers in new ways, and also how to manage teams in new ways. There is a lot of both internal organizational development that needs to happen across the field, and in parallel, that needs to happen with so many entrepreneurs right now. And that actually does provide an opportunity because it is so front of mind. And the logic for making those investments is so clear that it's an opportunity for us all to go on a journey together. I think one of the things that concerns me is the ways in which both the CDFI and other types of communities could end up risking being a new form of commodity in a information age. We've already seen what happened to the publishing and news and music industries. In a world in which we need to contemplate the possibility of rolling quarantines, the competitive advantage that the nonprofit world has often relied upon has been our emphasis on relationality and on community. I think that the discussion about business models, therefore, needs to be both about how do we offer what we have to bring to our communities in more accessible ways, and there are some really important advantages to that. But at the same time, how do we preserve and maintain the soul of our field, of our organization, and doing that in a way that that is able to navigate the tensions out in the ecosystems right now. But that, I think, is one of the biggest questions that we have to face: is how do we continue to believe and push for a world that is built around relationships and not just the offering of products and services.
Yeah.
So
Alice,
I'm actually going to follow up with that question with Donna, because, you know, at a time when you're not allowed to leave your house, and if you go and meet with anybody, you're wearing a mask and you're staying 6 feet apart, and you're certainly not going to go and build a relationship. How do you answer that question? I mean, I agree. I think these things are all about relationships and investing in people. And now we're telling everybody only hang out with your family members and don't get near anybody. At least for the next, at least for 14 weeks, and it might be 26 weeks.
A great summary of just what that challenge is, because again, we are advocating for greater digital technology, greater move toward technology, and yet so much of what the CDFIs do involve a high-touch relationship with their customers, and so we have. We're doing, frankly, what others are doing in terms of kind of those virtual communications with our customers now. I have one member who is already working with his small business owners and his micro lenders on a marketing plan, and they're doing it virtually, really just starting to talk through what that marketing plan's going to look like. How does that business need to do a different pitch than what they've done pre-COVID-19. So I think there's always going to be that balance, Odette. I think you're going to have that balance. I don't think that frankly, I don't think we will, and my panelists, my colleagues may disagree with me, but I don't think we will ever be in an environment where we can be totally high-tech. I think there's really always going to be, because that's our strength. Our strength is actually working hand in hand with our customers as well. And so for us, it really is going to be about finding that balance. And I think there is a balance to be achieved, but it will never be totally reliant on technology, frankly.
So, Luz, I'd love for you to weigh in on that, and then I'm also going to make you do double duty and ask you a question from our audience as well. So first, why don't you weigh in, because I agree with Donna. I'm interested in hearing what your perspective is, having, since you've done this at the very high touch level for a very long time.
Yeah, you know, I probably have a little bit of a different opinion on this, only because of my background in the past, prior to working in a nonprofit CDFI, working in for-profits. I think that since COVID, you know, like many small businesses you mentioned, right, we have had to pivot as well. And we have had to shift our business models for customer acquisition, for loan underwriting, servicing, funding, collections, all of the things that before, in many cases, we used to do face-to-face, right? So the idea of boots on the ground and the idea of face-to-face interaction, you know, if you think about it, within a 2 to 3 week period, we all had to shift to digital tools, to phone and text. And I think that this revised business model can truly be delivered in a culturally appropriate way that also ensures a most inclusive financial system. So let me give you an example. I do believe, to expand on the question, exactly what has been said, right? This is an excellent opportunity for CDFIs to embrace technology and to establish integrated partnerships with banks and fintechs and community partners and other referral sources that have much larger reach and also more robust budgets to market and acquire small business customers. Back in 2016, Opportunity Fund established a partnership with Lending Club. Lending Club is the nation's largest online marketplace lender, as many of you know. And this was the first national, award-winning partnership that was established with an integration to expand access to responsible and affordable services for underserved communities. Since that time, we are a California-based CDFI. We have been able to provide capital in 46 states to thousands of small business owners. So this is a combination where Opportunity Fund brought the mission focus of a CDFI with the online lending expertise of a fintech, and it's created a new model, again, for providing responsible, transparent, and affordable capital to meet the needs of these underserved communities. So I do think that these crises, you know, as the saying goes, don't let a crisis go to waste, right? I think that a crisis really gives us the opportunity to think outside the box in ways that we have never thought before and try to make our business models more effectively and more efficient. Partnerships are a key to doing that. I think this is going to be a time for CDFIs to really collaborate and work closely together and decide what is the best way that we can scale our impact for the benefit of the customers and the communities that we serve.
Excellent. I'm going to ask you to weigh in on a question. I'm getting so many questions that I'm actually just going to start throwing them out for you guys to answer so that we really are serving our audience today. And Luz, you can kick this off, and then anybody who wants to jump into the next ones, just go right ahead. How could the PPP loan have been rewritten to better help small businesses?
Okay, I don't know that we have enough time left on this call, but I'll try to talk about that for a little bit. So, you know, I think that, and I don't want to take away, because I do think that it was an amazing effort. If you look at the amount of lending that the SBA does on an annual basis, this was 20 times the amount in a reduced, you know, 6-week period, right? And so I think what happened, and we all know this, is that PPP was originally channeled through large banks, right? And unfortunately, CDFIs, who are the organizations serving these underserved minority, immigrant, et cetera, communities, they did not get access to it on the first round, so to speak, right? And so our customers, they don't generally bank with banks. So they went on to the big banks, and they all stood at the back of the line waiting for the funds to get to them, and they never did. So on the second round, I think it got better. The funds were then directed to CDFIs. We were able to apply and became an authorized lender. But if you think that only 10% of PPP funding has been allocated to small loans under $50,000, that means that too many mom and pop shops, which are often the source of stability for numerous families and communities, got turned down, right, from traditional banks, and they could only access capital through CDFIs, but not all CDFIs were able to participate. I think that, you know, allocating a portion, because on the second round, they allocated funds to both CDFIs and banks under $10 billion in assets. Well, in the US, 97% of financial institutions have less than $10 billion in assets, okay? So allocating a portion of this funding directly to CDFIs would have been incredibly, incredibly helpful. As an example, when we started launching this, we were expecting to get to $25,000, $30,000 average loans. The average loan size for us was $15,000. So that indicates to you the kinds of businesses that all of us as CDFIs had. The other part, which is very unfortunate, is that not all businesses qualify for PPP loans because they don't have documentation, their immigration status, a number of things. So having a program that does support the communities that are most in need is extremely, extremely important. And then there are other government, you know, actions and support programs that I think are very important in order to provide the kind of assistance that small businesses are going to need, not just now, because PPP was a 2.5 months of salary, pegged to 2.5 months of salary. That's barely skimming the surface. The real need is going to come afterwards, when these businesses need to reopen and start to revive the economy.
Alex, this is an interesting question, and I thought because of your background, this might be one for you. How do we bring what we have to communities and also preserve and maintain the soul of our organizations while navigating tensions in the world right now? You talk a lot about sort of culture and strategy and organization. And it is hard. I'm a small business owner myself, right? It's hard to think about compassion and think about others when you're literally trying to keep your business alive day in and day out?
That's a wonderful question. And actually, it makes me think that we often underestimate who our entrepreneurs are in our community and what they really represent. At Rising Tide Capital, one of the things that we've always really wanted to lift up is the ways in which an entrepreneur at the most fundamental level is someone who responds. Someone who responds to the needs of the world, to the desires of the world, who finds a way, who hears the call of the other and finds a way to respond to that call. And what we've seen at Rising Tide Capital, we work with about 1,000 entrepreneurs a year across New Jersey, and we partner with a network of organizations around the country. In fact, if there's anyone out there that's looking to bring an entrepreneurship program into your community in this time, we'd love to connect with you. We're looking to share our model. But what we have seen is our entrepreneurs standing up and responding once more, as they always do. They're forming sewing circles and sewing and delivering masks to our first responders. They are partnering and using their delivery vehicles to bring food for the elderly in our community. They are coming up with new ways of responding, and they are on the ground seeing the needs more clearly than many of us do. And so I think one way of answering the question is to really come to a much deeper understanding about the role of entrepreneurship in our society itself. We like to think of entrepreneurship as applied creativity. And our field is about so much more than just business. This is about agency and ownership and participation and creativity. And so I think if we can respond to the deeper call that really animates our field, it can align us with the deepest call that animates the entrepreneurs that are out there, because it really, of course, a sustainable business model needs to make money, but it requires so much more than a desire for profit maximization to really be willing to go through the journey of being an entrepreneur. And we see passion and applied creativity every day at work. And I think if we really hang on to and start aligning with that soul of entrepreneurship as the soul of one who hears and responds, I think that we can help really build that new economy and the society that we really need in this world and in this time.
Donna, this is a question from Lawrence Jackson. When we have looked at loan requests for emerging businesses, not enough emphasis is placed on cash flow from sales and community-based marketing. Do you see this as well?
Yes, I do. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with the business owner's ability to have that cash flow. I mean, we are operating on such thin margins sometimes that it is very difficult that micro business might be pushing that money out quickly out the door for expenses or using it for operating expenses and others. So the cash flow is always going to be a challenge, I think, for micro businesses. And I think if I can, Soledad, just go back to something we were talking about just in terms of PPP. I mean, that is probably one place where, you said where would I want to see it rewritten. I think not enough has been built into that program to really recognize some of the specific challenges that micro businesses are facing. And that's you've certainly highlighted just one of those. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with the lack of outreach that has been done to those communities that have been hardest hit. And I am particularly thinking about African American communities as well. I mean, we're seeing that not only is there a health crisis within the African American community, but the number of working small business owners have fallen about 40%. And while I, again, think that there's a real balance between technology and how you reach customers and the relationship part, I think for certain populations, and I will include the African American population in there, a higher level of relationships, of high touch was absolutely needed. And again, I think some of the struggles that those businesses are facing right now, a lot of it can't be done by technology. You have to have someone actually working side by side with that person to give them the kind of support and guidance that they need. And so the outreach is a really big part of that as well.
Luz, I think coming off of what Donna just said. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alex. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, actually, I was hoping to ask a question of my fellow panelists. Would that be okay?
Are you taking over the moderation of this panel? Yes, of course it's okay.
Not at all. Not at all. I felt like this was an opportunity because Luz and Donna have been so articulate and they're such important voices in our field. And I'm curious because Rising Tide Capital isn't a lender directly. One of the things that I've been worried about in terms of how do we respond and shift in this time and what do we need to advocate for, the status that is maintained as a CDFI is, from what I understand, dependent upon the performance of your loan portfolios. And so Luz made a really wonderful comment earlier about the tensions and dynamics that may cause the banking industry to need to be more conservative as we head into what we don't know if it's going to be a recession or a depression. And I'm concerned about the ways in which CDFIs may, by virtue of their mission, want to lean into this moment to be more creative around underwriting principles and other ways of deploying financial capital, and whether there is any restraint that they feel based on fast forwarding a couple of years and thinking about their portfolio performance, and whether there is any safeguards that we need to advocate for as a field with the CDFI fund to make sure that the performance of loans being deployed in this time is not counted against the CDFIs when it comes to renewing and maintaining that important status. Is that a? I'm going
to have your colleagues answer that, but I'm going to throw a little piece onto that because it actually came from our last panel as well, if that's okay. Which is, they basically were asking, could CDFIs be more flexible? Right? And I think that's part of what Alex is saying. If you're stuck to these stringent rules, you lose the ability to help the people who fall in the cracks. Is that possible? Why don't you start us off, Donna, and then Luz will go to you next.
Yeah, no, and I think, I think these CDFIs have historically been flexible in terms of the type of lending that they've done, certainly in looking at the underwriting. If anything, it's interesting, Alex. I think that in some cases, what you saw even after the Great Recession is that there were some CDFIs that started to behave more conservatively. And I used to always say, if you become more like a bank, then there's no distinction between being a CDFI and a bank, because for us in the industry, it's always been about how can we provide more flexible terms and other types of, flexibilities built into the actual lending that's being done. What kind of fallback or what kind of pushback will we have if we become even more flexible? It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that even now you're seeing CDFIs, and you probably are too in where you're located, CDFIs that really are saying we're going to push the envelope a little bit more. We need to do that in order to make sure that these populations don't fall through this chasm. And so given that most of us are not faced with federal regulation, the question is operationally, from an audit standpoint, from the optics of how we're being viewed, are we doing the job that we need to do? Personally, I think that CDFIs always need to be in that corner that is providing greater flexibility and really looking at ways in which you can kind of stretch the definitions of what becomes good, sound underwriting to make sure that your customer needs are actually being met. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does. Luz, I'm curious how you feel about that.
Sure. So we all know that even before COVID, right, CDFIs were already struggling with not having sufficient assets or net assets to support lending growth. And now to the point that both panelists have made is, we're going to see increased losses. I'm sure, many of us are already seeing them, right? As well as a significant need to provide immediate injections of cash to existing and new small businesses, that's what they need right now, right? And what we, I think, are seeing in many cases is that CDFI's financial position is worsening. Their net asset ratios are dropping, their operating liquidity is dropping, their delinquency rates are rising, which all means that banks, right, which is where we're going to need a lot of help because we all borrow from banks as well, we need to have conversations up front and keep them informed because some of the ratios and the loan covenants are going to be broken. And what that means is that when a loan covenant might be broken, then the loan becomes in default, and then CDFIs have to pay off the loan, which sort of exacerbates the problem. I think that the underwriting question is a very important one because even for traditional lenders and fintechs, the old way of underwriting, like looking at FICO scores, in this environment, that has become meaningless. A, because past performance is not going to indicate future behaviors or performance. And so I think there's an opportunity here, again, for CDFIs to think about how can there be a blended underwriting model where you look at some of the past history, but you also start to work in looking at the current business and the cash flow and pulling certain data and analytics, leveraging technology in order to make more factual, more on-time, real-time lending decisions. I think that's going to be very important because the models that we all employed before are probably pretty obsolete and going to be obsolete for a while. Again, another opportunity to innovate. I also think that in addition to what CDFIs can do and how banks can help us to get out of this by perhaps giving certain waivers in terms of breaking covenants and loan covenants. And I think we all have the same loan covenants, a 20% net asset ratio, a 1% operating liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. I think that there are other programs that should be made available. And these are government programs. For example, there's going to be unspent money from PPP. And perhaps those funds should be allocated to the CDFI fund in the Treasury Department to be downstream to CDFIs so that can be net assets, that can be equity that we all can use. I think we've all talked about, the CDFI fund increasing to $1 billion to provide that is now more needed than ever. I think that also the government can play a real key role in helping us with loan guarantee programs. For example, reauthorizing the State Small Business Credit Initiative, known as SSBCI. This is a very good program. It's a federal finance program that was created after the Great Recession that delivered flexible, affordable capital to small businesses around the country via guarantees, loan loss reserves, and other high leverage capital access programs. These programs leverage $1 for each dollar in federal funds. CDFIs can deploy $8 in capital to small businesses. So a lot of the programs that were created then are still being used by local states. We have been a big user of this program in California. So I think that's really, really important. And then last but not least is CRA. We cannot have this conversation without talking about CRA. This needs to be stronger than ever. We need consensus among all bank regulators that the original focus on LMI communities needs to be preserved and needs to be expanded. And this is not the time to water down CRA. In fact, this is the time to strengthen it so we can continue to have the resources we need to deploy into the communities that will need it the most.
So this is a question that I think is going to be for all of you. And I think it's interesting coming off of what Luz has just said about sort of when strategies are obsolete, you have this opportunity. You can either freak out or you can innovate, right? Those are kind of your two choices right there. The question is this. So then what's your biggest fear? What's the thing that keeps you up at night as a small business advocate? What's that thing that's having you freak out as opposed to thinking innovate? Or maybe you start by freaking out and you move into innovation when you talk about or think about your biggest fear. Donna, will you kick us off, and then we'll go to Alex, and then we'll go to Luz.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are too many things keeping me up at night. So with that,
pick the top two.
I'll just name a couple. My fear is that, again, when you look at the number of small business owners that have been impacted by this crisis, when you look at, again, the disproportionate number and percentage of African American businesses and others who simply do not have the means because they don't have the income to cover expenses even for more than 3 months. I wonder what will those folks do? I mean, I was talking to someone in Southwest Georgia where that is the hot spot for the coronavirus, and not one of the African American businesses at that time, I don't know what that's changed recently, but not one had received any sort of PPP loan at all. And these were small businesses. Again, these are businesses that AEO has talked about in terms of the pathways that needed to be designed for them to establish, areas of which they could get higher revenue. But you're seeing, the beauty salons, the barber shops, the daycare centers, the other kind of care facilities. These are folks where you see a large number of African American, Latino, and other populations of color in those categories. And my thought is, well, these are the essential workers. And so what happens if they don't survive? And it's almost like the game of cards. One card falls and the rest will follow. And so what do we do to shore that up, to make sure those pathways are available, to talk about, not only talk about, to take those actions and take those words and make those actionable items to make sure technology is there. Again, I work in an area that is largely rural, and a lot of places still don't have broadband. You see that also in low-income communities, the digital divide. And so in the same way that we saw, I think, the devastation of leakage back in the Great Recession when so many people lost their homes and were not able to regain a foothold, and that loss of home ownership, what it meant, particularly for communities of color. I still see and fear that same sort of devastation, but perhaps to an even greater degree. So that's what keeps me up at night. And I think that's probably what keeps us all going on this panel, is to make sure that doesn't happen.
That's interesting, right? The thing that keeps you up at night is also the thing that motivates you not to give up, because it's so critical. So Alex, what would you add to that list of things that are a real challenge, but also need to be fixed, frankly?
Yeah, amen to what Donna said. Couldn't agree more. I would point to three things that really keep me up at night. The first is, of course, what so much of the first panel focused on, the racial wealth gap in this country. The reports that came out a few years ago about the median net worth of African American families in the United States being projected to fall to zero by 2053. The ways in which, if we don't get this moment right, that trend could accelerate in ways that we can't stop is something that we need to be really, really focused on. I really loved the comment about making sure that we really second guess race neutral policy in that context. I thought that was a very interesting comment. We need to be focused on that. The two other things that I would really hope that we can see in this moment is, number one, not to misunderstand the moment that we're living through. The last time I had an opportunity to speak on an AEO stage, it was about the role of the fourth industrial revolution, the role that technology and automation was playing in transforming the global economy and the US economy. We just fast forwarded 10 years in that conversation. All the jobs that just got automated or turned into remote or laid off, the economic logic within companies, it makes it such that the investment in change management and other kinds of shifts, those jobs aren't coming back in the way that they did. And we need to be really focused on the way in which the labor market and the role of entrepreneurship is changing in this time that we're living in. And what I talked about in terms of intensification before, we really fast forwarded in ways that we weren't prepared before, and we may not be prepared for the economy we're going to be stepping into once we can really begin the recovery process. So I hope we don't misunderstand what is happening in the midst of all of the fog of the crisis that we're navigating. And finally, I think that if we miss the opportunity to harness the level of collaboration and cooperation and creative thinking to fight the the real battle that's coming in the next 20, 30 years with the ecological crisis. Now is the time to harness the amount of energy and focus and visibility to make sure that we can push for the green economy that we need. Because if we think that the coronavirus has been a threat to our prosperity and our communities, we have something much bigger coming, and we need to prepare.
Luz, I'm going to give you the final word on this for our panel today, because it's part of the whole concept, and I can tell both Donna and Alex feel like they are optimistic, but they're not Pollyanna-ish about the critical nature of the change that has to come, not just to get through coronavirus, but because it has to change. It has to change for the next crisis, and it also, in many cases, doesn't work so well right now, so it has to change. Tell me a little bit about, in the answer to that very question, do you think? Not only are you optimistic or pessimistic, but what are the things that keep you up at night? Because I think they overlap.
I think it's everything that both panelists have said. Look, I mean, one of my questions is how many CDFIs are going to be able to stay in business, right, after this all is said and done, particularly, the smaller ones, given what has happened in their local communities. And is there an opportunity here to, sometimes, again, a crisis sort of disrupts the way we do things. It doesn't interrupt it, because interruption is, okay, you're listening to music and you turn it off and then you turn it back on again and the music continues. This is a real disruption. It's going to require that we change the ways in which we do business. And when you look at the solvency and the strength of CDFIs that were not doing very well prior to this, what is going to happen? And is there an opportunity, recognizing the need of those CDFIs in those local communities, is there an opportunity here to start collaborating better? To have the ecosystem understand that this is not about my CDFI doing my loans in my local communities, but this is about how can the sum of 1 + 1 make it 5? And how can we collectively, with partnerships, perhaps with combinations of CDFIs coming together, how can we expand that access to capital, to technical assistance, to services that are going to be needed, right? Because each and every one of us are going to have to make individual investments. Imagine if we brought those investments together and maximize those opportunities. One of the things that we recently did is the combination between Acción US Network and Opportunity Fund. And the reason was because we felt that the two of us separate could not do as much as the two of us together. And so I think that is a mindset that we all need to start keeping as we move forward, and understand that, CDFIs, we will not be deterred. We will not waver. We will continue forward, because the work that we do is too important and too needed in the communities that we served. And we see day in and day out since this started how all team members and all CDFIs have been working to support clients with payment relief, with new money, with technical assistance, financial coaching, and we've heard inspirational stories. And to your point, that's what keeps us awake, but that's also what motivates us every single day. And it gives us the strength to manage and change and weather any storm.
So clearly, I think from this panel, our takeaways are crisis has embedded in it opportunities to do better. And not to get stuck in the fog, if I can steal your phrase, Alex, but instead harness the crisis for change that really needed to come anyway. A big thank you to my panelists, Luz Urrutia. Luz, I've mangled your name 6 times today in my practice, and my name is Maria de la Soledad. I should be able to roll that right off my tongue. So my apologies. And when I see you in person, I'll apologize in person. Donna Gambrell as well, and Alex Forrester. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. For everyone who's watching, thank you for sending in your questions. We were able to get to many of them, so we appreciate that you're participating. We're going to take literally a 1-minute break while we hear from our sponsor. And when we come back, we're going to be hearing from entrepreneurs about how they are dealing with this crisis. That's right after this message from our sponsor. Stay with us.
Today in America, we're waking up to a new reality. But every day, there are new heroes who inspire us. BB&T and SunTrust, together as Truist Financial, are here to help. We call it Truist Cares. Because while we may be apart for now, we'll get through this together. Find out how we're helping at truist.com/truistcares.
Our communities need help like never before. And Wells Fargo employees are assisting millions of customers across America through fee waivers and payment deferrals, helping people stay in their homes through mortgage payment relief efforts, and donating $175 million to help hundreds of local organizations provide food and other critical needs. When you need us, Wells Fargo is here to help.
Today in America, we're waking up to a new reality. But every day, there are new heroes who inspire us. BB&T and SunTrust, together as Truist Financial, are here to help. We call it Truist Cares. Because while we may be apart for now, we'll get through this together. Find out how we're helping at truist.com/truistcares.
Our communities need help like never before. And Wells Fargo employees are assisting millions of customers across America through fee waivers and payment deferrals, helping people stay in their homes through mortgage payment relief efforts, and donating $175 million to help hundreds of local organizations provide food and other critical needs. When you need us, Wells Fargo is here to help.
Today in America, we're waking up to a new reality. But every day, there are new heroes who inspire us. BB&T and SunTrust, together as Truist Financial, are here to help. We call it Truist Cares. Because while we may be apart for now, we'll get through this together. Find out how we're helping at truist.com/truistcares.
Our communities need help like never before. And Wells Fargo employees are assisting millions of customers across America through fee waivers and payment deferrals, helping people stay in their homes through mortgage payment relief efforts, and donating $175 million to help hundreds of local organizations provide food and other critical needs. When you need us, Wells Fargo is here to help.
Today in America, we're waking up to a new reality. But every day, there are new heroes who inspire us. BB&T and SunTrust, together as Truist Financial, are here to help. We call it Truist Cares. Because while we may be apart for now, we'll get through this together. Find out how we're helping at truist.com/truistcares.
Welcome back. This is Soledad O'Brien, and that's a very good reminder of hashtag Revitalize Main Street. That's how you want to be communicating with us, because obviously, if you're watching, you've registered. That also means that you can send in questions for our panelists. Thank you for your patience as we bring our panel together. I'm going to begin with two of our panelists, and our third panelist, Sylvia Ortiz, will be joining us in just a little bit. We start with Stephanie Hart. She's the founder of Brown Sugar Bakery, and it came about after craving the taste of the cakes her grandmother made. For years, she couldn't sort of figure out how to get the taste of her childhood, no matter what. So she worked to recreate her grandma's recipes in her home kitchen. In March of 2004, she remastered the pineapple coconut cake. The rest is history, as they say. Many others were to follow, and that's when Brown Sugar Bakery in Chicago was born. Here's a very short list of some of what Brown Sugar Bakery serves up: cakes, cobblers, pies, cupcakes, bread pudding. For all of us who are at home just eating our way through dessert, this is amazing. And I am confident that Stephanie Hart and I are going to have a conversation off this panel, so I can try out all of the fine food that she creates. She also has the Obama cake, which apparently is a 4-layer red velvet chocolate and yellow cake topped with cream cheese frosting, chocolate drizzle, and pecans. Woo! Also joining us today is Rhonda Mills. She's a marketing guru who began her entrepreneurial journey back in 1998. As a result of experiencing a big wage decrease when she moved to a rural area, she decided to become an entrepreneur to increase her income potential. She wears many hats as an entrepreneur, from human resource management to purchasing to research and development. But marketing is what is her passion, creating, implementing, and measuring marketing campaigns. Her latest business venture, I should mention, is as the founder of Enjoy Yourself Transportation. It's an event shuttle and party bus company in Raleigh, North Carolina. And our third panelist is Sylvia Ortiz. She's the principal sales coach and owner of Sil the Drills Coaching, which is a consultative sales firm that helps businesses reevaluate their sales strategy. As soon as we can get through some of the issues with her Skype, we're going to bring her into the conversation. But I will begin with Stephanie. Say that again. Oh, I'm going to begin with Stephanie and Rhonda Mills. So Stephanie, welcome.
Good morning.
Wow, your list of the things that you make is amazing, but we're here really to talk about business. I know a little bit of your business story, but I'm interested in pre-coronavirus to post-coronavirus as an entrepreneur. Can you walk us through the moment when you realized what was a crisis was really a huge crisis, for your business?
Well, I had really been starting to hear a lot. My daughter is an opera singer, so she is in the world kind of more exposed. When the NBA closed, I said, I wonder if this is going to impact me. And that following week, everything kind of just hit the fan. Navy Pier, where I have a store, Navy Pier is a Chicago landmark, was closed down. And then I really had to look at all of this business that just fell off. All of my events, weddings, big birthday parties, poof, gone. And then additionally, I will let you know that we were impacted early on. The first person to die in Illinois was a Brown Sugar Bakery customer. At that time, I decided to shut down business and take some time to reevaluate. I can tell you that I was full of a lot of emotions. One, I was concerned about my employees. There wasn't enough information about how to spread. I am in a food business. I had a lot of concerns about that. And we took a step back to evaluate how could we come back and do better. I have changed. Corona has changed my business plans. Initially, my business plan was to open a 4th store. We are now not going to do that. We are really putting all of our efforts and energy into web business, shipping, and going that route as we figure out how to begin to be open to the public locally in the current constraints. So we're doing curbsides and pre-orders and that type of thing.
Let me ask our producers, do we have Rhonda Mills yet, or do we not have her? Oh, we have Sylvia Ortiz. Perfect. So Sylvia, thank you for joining us as well. Walk us through that same moment. Was there a moment where, as we heard from Stephanie, you sort of realized like what you thought was a drip of just bad news suddenly became, oh my goodness, I have a crisis. And what was your first reaction as an entrepreneur?
Hi, I'm sorry. I just logged in. Can you get it one more time?
I'm happy to. I was just listening to Stephanie walking us through when she first realized what was sort of just the bad news we were all hearing about coronavirus, first overseas and then nursing homes. And then there was a point where it suddenly crossed a threshold, certainly for me, and I think for Stephanie too, where it was, oh my gosh, this is going to impact my business. What was that moment like for you? What was your reaction when you started realizing like, oh, I need to rethink my business strategy?
First, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here. Hope everyone's doing fine. It was actually pretty exciting for me. I wasn't too nervous. Being in sales, we used to being adjustable and going with the flow. But I didn't really have to pivot so much my business because I already had a big component on a digital platform. So it wasn't too difficult for me. What I did have to do, focus on, I guess, repackaging, repricing. That was where the shock came for me.
Oh, and it actually sounds so. Let's walk through that, both for you and maybe Stephanie. You can start for us because you mentioned suddenly you're rethinking it. Can you take a step back as an entrepreneur, Stephanie? Did you feel? How did you move into that next step of okay, our business model now is going to shift, and it's going to shift within 24 hours? What were the things that you considered? And did you have a bit of a shock like Sylvia is talking about her shock as well? It looks like I don't have Stephanie, so we're going to try to get her signal back. So Sylvia, I'm going to then go back to you on this, if I may. So you said suddenly you had to rethink your pricing. Can you walk us through that? How did you start re-strategizing around your business? Because obviously, that's not something you get to do over a month or even a couple of weeks. This was immediate.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that I did have support. I'm with BOC Center. They actually did help me with kind of stabilizing my online presence. With that, I was able to go over my pricing. So what I realized is my sales packages contained of, let's say, package one of a sales script, rebuttals, team training. And nowadays, with companies, there are no more teams. So what I've been doing is just pretty much going to my local neighborhoods, and I'm like, okay, if you are a real estate company, obviously you're going through changes and need a new sales script. So I can I could prepare a specific individual sales script for you. And then other companies who will need, let's say, they're now creating a web content. They need copy. They need content marketing. They need email marketing. So I'm pretty much providing that service for them individually as well, instead of combining it within a package. I figure my services are still needed nowadays. So instead of a package, let me just give you the individual need and that individual service.
So suddenly you just had to be flexible in thinking about this. Okay, I think I've got Stephanie back again. So Stephanie, Sylvia and I were just talking about how very quickly you had to kind of rethink your business. What were your first steps toward that? I mean, how did you start? Obviously, number one, you weren't going to expand to a fourth business that you were considering. But what else did you do when it came to, next step strategies? Walk us through that.
The first thing I did was really sit down with myself and a journal and really start thinking about if nothing goes back to normal, how could I communicate with my customers? And so I went to bat like really super fast. As my daughter and I say, we retch around. And I began working on a cake mix because then that is a way that I could communicate, serve my customer. You can make me at home. And now I'm at stage 3 of that, and I should be able to launch that in about 2 weeks into testing. I think, though, let me just say this. First, I had to get my head together because I was really distraught. I mean, it was a whole lot. 29 employees that got laid off, not sure what things were going to do. So I kind of spent some time working on myself and my headspace and educating myself about webs and listening to every podcast that I could. In order to start thinking straight about how I could still be in business in the future.
That's such great advice because I think we often sort of don't give credit to the trauma that comes with this kind of a thing, right? I mean, it's sort of what's the business decision, but we don't really think necessarily kind of how challenging it can be. I want to bring in Rhonda. I think we've got her single, but I think we only have her through audio. So Rhonda Mills, marketing guru. Rhonda, now you run a company as well. What were your first thoughts when COVID-19 struck around how you were going to manage your business?
Because we cater to large groups in the transportation industry, our operations came to a complete halt. So we had to quickly pivot and, bring in a new line. We started to do personal transportation and airman services, but our primary focus really became more of giving back to the community that has served us. We initiated wellness calls and, connecting our community with resources they needed just to get through the pandemic. So we shifted our beliefs and offerings to be more of, giving back versus and just taking downtime to restructure, reevaluate, and come up with some new processes that could be more effective going forward.
And Sylvia, I'll begin with you, and then we're going to go to Stephanie next, and Rhonda will go to you last. Did you feel like you were getting clear guidance and assistance from government organizations? Did you feel like there were advocates for small businesses who were really communicating with you and helping you out? So Sylvia, why don't you start us off?
Yes, I do believe that I did have the resources, especially with the Women Resource Center for the BOC. Absolutely. They did help me solidify that e-commerce that I need in order to have the transition. Most people have web pages for like landing pages and not actually selling their product or actually promotion. So yes, the BOC definitely did help me with that service, and I actually appreciate it.
Fantastic. That's great news. Stephanie, did you feel the same way that you were getting good information? Some entrepreneurs I know sort of felt like they were left a little bit bereft in terms of knowing what to do for next steps.
I am part of a strong African-American business community on the south side of Chicago, and I did feel embraced. Even the city of Chicago called us the first week we were at home. So I felt like the information was flowing. For me, the disconnect was in my banking relationship and trying to build to get a PPP and apply for some of the other things. I did not get supported there in my banking relationships. I had to fast create a new relationship with a much smaller bank.
Interesting. I'm going to ask more about banking relationships in just a moment, but first I want to get back to Rhonda with that same exact question. Did you feel supported? Did you feel like you had people giving you good advice and information?
Yes, I have a wealth of resources in my network, so I was well supported, well informed. I'm very well connected and have a great network. So I've got all the information that I need in order to pivot and move to the next step quickly.
Oh, that's fantastic. Great news. All right, so let's go back then to Stephanie. And you mentioned you were trying to get PPP, couldn't do it. Walk me a little bit through what happened before and then the process and then afterwards. How are you feeling about that banking relationship? You've obviously changed relationships. What has this taught you? What have you learned as an entrepreneur dealing with financial institutions in a crisis?
Well, I definitely learned that whatever financial institution you deal with, you have to do more than just make deposits. You have to hold them to task, get to know them, find out what other services there are, and really build a relationship with them so that you have somebody's phone number you can call. I've been depositing my money into large banks and growing my business without having traditional type of loans or services back from them. And in this crisis, I was not able to get through to anyone. None of my emails were returned. None of my phone calls were returned. And I went through my network trying to get to these bankers and was not able to get through.
Interesting. And I'm curious for both Rhonda and Sylvia. Sylvia, what was your banking situation? Did you feel like you had good access to your bankers? It is pretty interesting when everything's closed, you realize, oh, if I don't have someone's cell phone number, I'm never going to get to the bank.
Well, to be honest with you, I did not come across that issue. My banking issue, my banking's, I guess, situation was perfectly fine. Everything is done remotely, and I was able to communicate with them. I really did not come across no issues in that situation.
Fantastic. And how about for you, Rhonda?
I bank with the community bank, and I do have a personal relationship with my banker. So I was fortunately able to, when I initially opened my account, help them to understand what my growth projections were and to help me to hold my hand along the way, all along the way. And that I was very adamant about that when I opened my account, that I researched and did my due diligence before opening an account with the institution to make sure that they were going to properly serve my needs before I deposited one dime in that account.
Interesting. So there's a couple of questions that we're getting from the audience, and I want to run them by all of you because I'm not sure you're all going to have the same answer. Let's begin, Stephanie, with you. When you look back over the past few months that have passed now since the pandemic began, what would you do differently?
One, I would definitely have done like Rhonda suggested. In the beginning of my business journey, I would have done a lot more research on banks, banking, and developing a relationship with a bank. I have since made contact and begun banking with a community bank that got my PPP done. So that is a definite. And then I'll be honest and say that there are some trends of, that I ignored. People have been asking me to get my business online, to begin shipping. And because of my retail growth, I ignored that. I would not do that.
Interesting. How about for you, Sylvia? When you look back over the past few months, is there anything that you would do differently where you feel like you've learned and, hindsight being 2020, you'd approach it differently?
I probably, just like Rhonda said, I would have focused on building my website a lot stronger because that's where all the business is deriving from now. If I would have paid more attention to it, to finalize it, it would have been a much smoother transition.
Interesting. And how about for you, Rhonda? What have you learned over the past few months that you wish you knew, back in late February?
I think that diversification is very important. I look at my company now as, instead of before like a single stock, I look at it as a mutual fund to have several revenue streams, when before I just had focused on one. And when this happened, I had to quickly move and adjust. So I would, look for multiple ways to have revenue versus just one. So diversification is very important.
Rhonda, what's been the biggest obstacle to keeping your doors open? Is there one thing that you can point to?
Yes, my eggs were in one basket. I catered to large groups, and I thought that I was in an industry that was, soundproof, but I found out that, a big event like this helped me to look closer into what I was doing. So I guess just diversify, and pay attention to the market trends and be innovative with new technology, and seek more advice from community leaders and things like that as to where to be more connected with the community and better serve the community needs.
Interesting. And how about for you, Stephanie? What's been your biggest obstacle to keeping your doors open?
I have a kind of good problem. Right now, the biggest obstacle to keeping my doors opening is managing the demand. We are in a situation where we have to serve our customers 6 feet separated and in a pre-order scenario. So my space is getting ready to go under a mini construction, if you will, so that my customers can travel through my space more effectively. To minimize contact and those kinds of issues. I wasn't set up for that. We're a place where you come in and everybody hugs, and it's all about, everything's sweet and wonderful. And now it's sweet and wonderful, but you've got to stay back here, and we need this piece of glass here, and we need to open up a door there so you can walk in one door and out the other door. That's kind of where I'm struggling now, getting those things done.
Interesting. And you raise an interesting point that I think connects to a question that we got. you're a place where people come in and they get food and they get nurtured and they hug, and now it's like no touching. How have you, and you've had to lay off employees, and it has to be emotionally obviously wrenching for them and for you as their employer as well. How have you been dealing with the stress and the trauma and just the emotional upheaval in all of this?
Well, that I've really been working on building myself up so that I can stay connected with my employees. I worked really hard with them early on to try to make sure that they got all the services that they could get, that they were able to apply for all the help that they could get. Dealing with my customers, it's so hard. I have to be really kind of strict, and that's just not the nature of Brown Sugar Bakery or how we do business. But you have to maintain order in order to ultimately serve them. Or you'll get bad press because there'll be crowds out and people won't be social distancing. And these are all issues that I just didn't have to worry about before. I can't hug you as much as I would like to. I've got people that, have been coming to my bakery for 16 years and I can't hug them. I have to say, I'm sorry. And we wear masks and we wear gloves and we have to keep a new kind of order. It's tough.
Rhonda, I'm curious. I'm going to guess that you weren't necessarily hugging some of the big busloads of people that you were taking around. But the question is, has the emotional well-being of your team affected your business in any way, positively or negatively?
Yes, I had to first of all, gather myself together, because I went from, the phone ringing out the hook for new bookings to the phone ringing out the hook for cancellation. So I had to first gather my thoughts and myself to be able to move forward and communicate effectively to the people on my team. So I was always transparent about what was going on, and I'm an optimistic person by nature, so I encouraged and motivated them, but I was very transparent about what was going on and the new practice that we're going to have to put in place going forward. But I am the queen of the party, but so I might not hug them physically, but I was, I'm always there to, motivate and encourage and as my company said, help people to enjoy themselves. So, but, it's just about growth and me growing and being able to communicate effectively with my team about what's going on and staying abreast with the trends and everything like that. So it was a challenge, but this is not my first, business venture. So I was able to, be resilient and find my strength in others that surround me as well. So.
Great. Sylvia, here's a question about advice for other entrepreneurs who might be struggling a little bit, whether it's accessing their resources or maybe just business advice. Are there things that you did that helped you prepare for this type of situation? And maybe the situation is a crisis, not necessarily a massive public health situation. Were there relationships that you had cultivated that you were able to leverage that helped you out?
You know what? Yes, I can say not that I was fully prepared, but I had clients during this transition, and it was great to see how I was already implementing, have your clients be okay with, let's say, webinars or a Skype call or Zoom call, in order to accommodate their busy schedule. So I was kind of already training my team into leaning towards that. So when this happened, it was kind of a reinforcement. But I can say what we did differently would be all about verbiage. That is the biggest transition. That is the biggest change that we had, is how you approach people now. They're a little bit more cautious, they're a little bit more reserved. So what I can say is that I was able to help my team in that way. As far as relationships and having leverage, I'm glad to say that I'm known in the real estate industry and training a lot of those individuals, and I was able to help them and literally stabilize their clients and come in and see their older folks and provide resources to them and other people who are trying to, let's say, new entrepreneurs as well, bring them up and coming. So that was actually really great.
Oh, fantastic. So, Rhonda, two quick questions for you. One is, you mentioned diversification. Can you explain that? Obviously, the party bus is not taking a whole bunch of people around. What was your diversification strategy? And walk us through your mindset around that as a business protective measure.
we went to decided to do individual or private transportation. So in order to have some form of revenue, we start taking people to doctor's appointments, doing errand services. So that was just a way so that I can keep my employees moving and have some income for them during this time. So it was just the only thing that we could tap into at the current with our current inventory without taking in on any more debt like that. So there was something that we could get on the ground and move right away. So we reached out to all of our people in our community that we were currently serving, and just to see that if we could be a service in a different capacity to them.
Do you have, my second question for you, do you have advice, as I mentioned the question I was just asking of Sylvia, for entrepreneurs? Were there things that you did that you think were helpful in preparing you for what came down the pike that maybe you hadn't thought about before?
I actually started to monitor organizations that crisis readiness is their business. I started looking at like the Red Cross and hospitals just to see what strategies they use as they related to my industry. So that way I can, because that's what they do on a daily basis, an ongoing basis. So I, monitor the programs they have and things in place, and just try to see how I can customize that to make it effective in my business.
Great. So Stephanie, back to you, if I may. I'm curious if you've had unexpected support, and maybe it's from the community, but maybe it's a business support, people who you weren't necessarily thinking would sort of step up and be helpful to you, that were helpful.
You know what the biggest surprise I had was my very own employees that were laid off. We had while we were still completely shut down, we had a break-in attempt, and some of them came out to support me as we tightened up our hatches. And several of my employees had got together and talked about loaning me money. And that was, I can't even tell you. I didn't take it because, the PPP did come through and we're building back up now. But to have your employees offer something like that, to see, and I don't think it was from their perspective. I really think it's that they wanted to see me continue. And that was just amazing.
Wow. Yeah, especially at a time of such hardship for them as well. Sylvia, you mentioned sort of you've been building toward digital access. What other kinds of support do small businesses need? On the list of things that you kind of sort of wished you had or wish you'd been working toward, what would you put on that list in addition to really thinking about your digital strategy? Because, not being able to see people face to face means you had to have a new way of interfacing.
A really good question. Repeat it one more time. I have so much going through my head.
Okay, you mentioned that you decided in the crisis, you now realize that you needed a very robust digital strategy. Are there other things that you wish you had, back office support, things that you wish were on that list that you now know that you wish you'd had? There, and not just you, that small businesses need, right? I mean, it makes sense to look back and say, boy, small businesses really need to have a very robust and strong digital strategy to interface with their customers if customers can't actually come face to face.
Yes, it would be two.
What else would you put on that list?
Well, yes, it would be two things. One would be how to locate your leads and your niche online, because we're so used to people walking into your stores. They don't walk into your website. You have to, at this point, you have to go now get your leads and your clients. So if they were to teach something like that and have that type of support, that would be great, along with email marketing. Because email marketing is huge. It's not just, sending out email blasts with coupons, but you can send information, emails out, which are really good and very good reinforcement. But my main thing would probably be finding your niche, finding your customers online. That's a support that's needed for all businesses.
That's a great point. And that brings me to Rhonda, who is a marketing guru. How has that changed how you think about finding customers? I mean, for all of you, suddenly the way you got customers has been completely blown up and you need to rethink it. How has your marketing background changed your next step and your next strategy? Was there, outside of, digital access, anything that you felt like every small business needs to have that maybe you didn't consider before?
I've always been a fan of being present in the community, which hopefully going forward, that will still be able to be the case, with the rap vans, banners, showing up at different events and always being present and front of mind to my customers. I would show up at every event, baseball games, different things like that, so I can be seen in the community, show up at, being aware and connected to systems that that help me to be able to attend and be present. And if I can't be there personally, send my staff there to be present more and active in the community. Advertise at local with other local businesses, co-branding through other local businesses as well, to do partnerships and everything like that.
Great. So a final question for all of you, and I'm going to have you start for me, Stephanie. Are you optimistic? Are you panicking? Are you terrified? Are you pessimistic? How are you feeling at this moment in time where you all sound like your businesses are stabilized, but of course there's so much still unknown ahead?
I would say that I have kind of tried to stay in a neutral position so that I can think clearly. I want to be optimistic. That's what I would normally say. But it's a lot. And so what I'm trying not to do is be pessimistic. I'm trying to stay neutral and look at every situation so that I can be effective. And that takes a lot for me. So I'm really working to stay neutral in my thought process so that I can be effective and not get affected. There's so much news. Literally, I had to stop watching news. I barely go online because there's just so much negativity around doing business right now. So I'm trying to stay neutral so that I can get back out here and stay at it.
And how about for you, Rhonda? Are you feeling optimistic, pessimistic, neutral?
I am always 100%, 1,000% optimistic. That's my nature. I have been working on myself, personal development, so that I can present myself in that optimistic light. And failure it's not even an option. So I'm going to persevere, go forward, do whatever it takes to succeed.
Great. Sylvia, I'll give you the final word on this panel today. How are you feeling about your business opportunities and what the future looks like in an environment where I think a lot of us are very nervous about the future? I mean, I don't know that we can even tell you if, school's going to open come September.
Well, to be honest, I'm very optimistic. I've been in sales for so long, so I know you win some, you lose some. It's a roller coaster, and this is like any other roller coaster. Things are gonna go down and you go high. So I'm very optimistic. They're gonna come back to normal, and that we just have to be adaptive to, and that's what we're here to do. That's one thing I've learned in my career is you roll with the punches. We are in a technology world, and this is just kind of a shift, letting us know that we just have to shift a little bit harder towards technology. So I'm 100% optimistic.
Great. Well, Sylvia Ortiz and Rhonda Mills and Stephanie Hart. Ladies, I thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your businesses that you are helping keep going and making them thrive, not just survive through coronavirus. And it really tees up what our first two panels talked about, right? That we have to kind of rethink strategies, and a crisis is often a very good way to be forced to come up with new strategies in how to deal with things. That disruption isn't just going back to what was, but disruption actually can move you in a new direction. And it sounds like you're all models for how to think about what a new direction can be. So a big thank you to you ladies, and of course all of my panelists today. Really appreciate it. I'm going to send this right back to Corey Briscoe, who kicked it off with me a few panels ago, a couple hours ago, and we'll wrap it up from here. Corey?
Thank you, Soledad, and all of our amazing speakers and panelists for that conversation on resilient small businesses strengthening local economies. Tomorrow's theme, women, wealth, and entrepreneurship. So join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, and I promise you'll have an amazing time. Haven't had the chance to register? Go to aeoworks.org to register now. After all, tomorrow we're announcing the winner of our first giveaway. And I promise, I heard it's good. Haven't had a chance to connect with us yet? Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and keep the conversation going by using the hashtag #RevitalizeMainStreet. Until tomorrow, I leave you with the question: what will you do to help small businesses?